The most important 5 aspects to landscape painting are never spoken about. They apply these techniques in their paintings, but they don't mention why or what it is that they're doing. It just looks good. And the difference is that I go into the nitty gritty, and I came up with the number one most important aspect in all paintings, the graceful and melodic lines.
A pioneer in online art teaching, Johannes Vloothuis went from being an art hobbyist who enjoyed painting by numbers at the age of 35 to a master of multiple mediums with currently over 20 years of art teaching experience. How did this all happen? Join us today and learn the main secrets to making great art, regardless of the medium, why nature is not a good reference, how your execution depends on how big you're painting, why you should paint what you know and not what you see, and why every watercolor painting should have soft edges. Plus, special surprise for you, Johannes is doing a free class with us at Etcher on September 7th. At noon Eastern Time. We will paint a shoreline scene in acrylics, and from beginners to more advanced artists, everyone is welcome to join. You are welcome to join, and I hope to see you there. All right, let's dive right in.
I started late in my life. I was about 35 years of age. I had a business that would have a few people visiting, so I would divide the retail space, and at the back I would do some painting. And when customers came in, I used to sell satellite systems, and so when customers came in, I would just take care of them, go back to the painting.
I was not, that's amazing. So you started at age 35. You were already in love with art then, because you were dedicating every spare minute of your time to it.
After that, yes, I became big time hooked on wanting to learn it. Yes.
So let's even go like a little bit further back in time. So when you were a child, were you exposed to art growing up?
When I was a child, I remember I did one drawing of a rose for my mother, and that's about it. There was not this big passion for art when I was a child. I mean, all children have a passion for art, but I don't remember my teens doing any drawing or anything. I was a late bloomer, came very late in my life. And it started that my wife bought me a paint by number set to keep me busy. And I thought that was pretty easy. Of course, it was paint by numbers. And little did I realize how difficult it would get later on. But that's what got me going. I remember honestly, it was a paint by numbers kit. I just wanted to do a hobby.
Oh my God. How old were you
Never
back then?
did I realize it would go so far in my life.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I remember I did browse through the art magazines, and my story is interesting because I went through the magazines and I said to myself, boy, I wish I could paint like that. That looks like so much fun, but they're so good, these artists. I'd give 10 years of my life to paint like that. I remember telling myself that. And little did I know that I would end up working for that company whose magazines I used to admire and subscribe to.
Oh my God.
And be their leading instructor.
So what? So you started the painting by numbers, and you just couldn't get enough of it? What came after that?
I did that, and then what happened later on is this was during the 90s where Bob Ross was on TV, and he made it look so easy. And so yeah, I bought his books and I watched his programs, and I did about maybe 30 of his paintings. And that really helped me a lot because he worked with very thick brushes. And so you could see that there was a lot of looseness to his work. He didn't paint tight. So that was an influence because that's from then on, I was always a loose painter. But that's how I got started, thanks to Bob Ross.
And okay, so paint by numbers, Bob Ross. And
see, as you can see, it's evolving, right?
Exactly.
But then I said to myself, I'm sick and tired of copying other people's work. I want to do my own now. I didn't feel complete. So I remember walking into a studio with a watercolor artist. He was a master, and my jaw just dropped. And I thought I was pretty good because I was able to do the Bob Ross paintings. Very, very much similar, like a good job at it. And I walked into this guy's studio and I said, oh my gosh, I got so much to learn. And that's where it all started.
And you were working at the time at that satellite store, right?
I was in between jobs at that time. Transition. I had I was living in Mexico and I moved to Canada, and by the time I was starting to get it going, that's where I had that free time. Fortunately, I had that free time in between that I didn't put to waste.
Okay, and how did you take up on watercolor then? What did you
Well,
do?
that's because of that instructor. That was the only instructor that I knew of in this area. And so he was a watercolor artist, and that's where I started with that. I was so into it that he wasn't doing well with his little school. He rented a place and he wasn't getting students. But I was so eager to learn. And I said, well, how many students do you need? And he said, I need 6. I only have you. I said, what if I pay you for all 6 students? That's how much I wanted it. So I paid the fee of all 6 students to take the private class.
Oh my God.
It was a
this
good
is
investment.
amazing. Definitely
Yeah.
was a good investment. Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
digesting this
That's how
information.
much
I
I
had no
wanted it.
idea.
It was in my, I just knew I had to do it. I guess intuitively, so I never wanted to become a professional. That was not my intent. It was just to be a good hobbyist, but my career just soared. And there's much more to follow after that. I don't know if you
Oh,
got more questions.
no, please continue
Okay,
telling
I
that
keep
story
going.
because
Okay,
it's
so what I did is I did that, and he wasn't very giving. Like the information was not very thorough.
Mhm.
He was a very good artist, but as a lot of people have complained in a lot of workshops, these people are very gifted, and they can produce the paintings, but they don't really give you all the whys and hows. So it didn't last long. And so what I did is I subscribed to magazines, and I started to do what I call reverse engineering,
Mhm.
which means you take something apart and put it back together to understand how it was done. So I accumulated like 30 of my hero artists from these art magazines. There was no internet then. There was no YouTubes. It was just still magazines. And I started to cut out my favorite paintings and I started to analyze them one by one. And I said, okay, why do I like these? What's so special about these paintings? And I finally found out that there were common denominators that, let's say, 30 of the best artists would put together. And then I said, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. And I remember promising myself once, I said, if I ever learn to do this well enough, if I ever teach this, I'm going to be very giving. And to the date, that's been very true. And what I did after that is we bought a motor home, and I traveled to almost all the national parks in the United States and Canada to do plein air paintings. So I must have done at least 500 paintings over the months in the different places. And I rubbed elbows with some of the top artists in the United States, such as Jim Wilcox. I've admired his work, and I met him personally. I painted with him, and as well as other artists.
Mhm.
And my career kept going, and but I was not in the teaching yet.
Okay.
So as I kept learning, and I still knew, this is now around the 2010, 2011,
Hmm.
there were some things that I knew I was missing all the time. Like this is a very complex subject. You need artists. There's a big famine, in my opinion, of how much information should be given to artists that are not super talented, because I never was really talented. It just all became head knowledge that pushed me over the cliff, so to say. But I always were missing things. Anyway, so the plein air painting with my motorhome, that opened my eyes in some aspects. And so in 2010, I was on a blog called Wet Canvas.
Mhm.
And there were just they're just a huge community of artists. And I was starting to teach for free. And I noticed that there were some errors that some of the artists had, some misconceptions about getting darker and darker in landscapes. And what I did is I challenged that. And ultimately, it got the attention of Artist Network that I
Mhm.
was doing this for free. I guess there was just the moment was right where they said, okay, we need to increase our student enrollment. Let's try the online classes. So I proposed to them, why don't I just give online classes? And they really liked the idea, because that was when it was, the bird was in the nest ready to fly. That's when online started I could get continuous video.
2011.
through GoToMeeting. And so the first 3 months that was for free in 2011. We had almost 5,000 students then. And since then, I've been working for Artist Network very proudly.
Yeah, and doing a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. I've done about 430 paintings live with the students. And what I'm very proud of is that some of my students, most of them go back. They've been taking classes now with me for 12 and a half years nonstop. And I've taught them everything I know, but still they're still signing up every course.
And it's what you said. If you're just doing because they're doing it and you don't get it, then it's not clicking and you're not really getting better unless you're able to do what you did, the reverse engineering. And that's so much work to do by yourself. But if you have a really good teacher.
And it's a lot of work. It took me 15 years I would say, to unravel. I'm going to comfortably say I might be a little bit boastful here, but I think I know everything that needs to be known about landscape painting or painting in general, still lifes, portraits, because in the last 3 or 4 years, nothing has changed. It's just always verifying through my own paintings that what I'm applying is correct. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing here, Anya, is the most important 5 aspects to landscape painting are never spoken about. This is one thing that just drives me crazy. I've gone to workshops, I've read books, I've seen blogs on YouTube, everything. The most important 5 aspects they're not talking about it. These very top artists, mm-hmm. they apply these techniques in their paintings. Mm-hmm. But they don't mention why or what it is that they're doing. It just looks good. So they're saying, well, I'm going to do this line or I'm going to do that. And they go ahead and they do it and it looks good, but they don't really put the finger on it. And the difference is that I go into the nitty gritty, into the details, and I say, and I came up with the number one most important aspect in all paintings is something that's talked about. I put a term on it, graceful and melodic lines. That everything turns out to be in lines. If your lines are correct, mm-hmm. it needs much more elaboration. I don't know if you've ever popped in one of my classes. There's something that's called, there's gradient planes. Like they all talk about values, they all talk about masses, etc. But the most important aspects are quiet. They don't appear in books, nowhere. It's like a secret. And when I have new people coming in and the first hour, Anya, and I know I'm sounding boastful, but I'm very proud of this, or the first 2 hours when I get these new people coming and said, these are things I've never heard of before, and mm-hmm. suddenly they make total sense to me. Yeah.
Can you, I know we're just on video, you're not painting, you're not demonstrating right now, but what sort of things are those? I'm so curious. Okay. You can't leave me hanging.
I got time, and I'm a natural, I just like to teach. I believe this has to go out in the art world. Everybody would get much better. Mm-hmm. Again, there's a famine where people are signing up for workshops. They want to go here, and they're coming home almost empty-handed. They have mm-hmm. a good time, but how does that revolutionize your art? What I reveal, it just revolutionizes your art overnight, literally, in the first 5 minutes. And what it is I've come to the conclusion that the reason why paintings look good, and that's all of them, it can be still lifes, pet portraits, people portraits, and landscapes. The whole answer is in the eye movement.
Okay.
For example, nature will present you with round trees. People that don't know any better, they're going to copy a round tree. The problem with the round tree is that when the brain is processing the information, it follows a line, and the eyes are moving too quickly. And so I came up I came up with a line that's called a graceful line, that you do it like a roller coaster, up and down like this, a musical line that you do everywhere. So you take your photographs. I have a book, by the way, published, and it goes into a lot of detail about this. It's called Landscape Painting Essentials. And I show examples, but for instance, you can follow, many photographs will have straight lines or fast moving lines, mm-hmm. and they're cumbersome for viewers to be seeing this. So when you slow down the eye and you take it for, let's say, I can just paint it out sort of like, if you make the eye, instead of going over a tree like this, you go.
Slowly.
That's called the graceful line. Immediately, the subject matter that you're painting is going to increase its beauty tenfold. Then you'll have something that's called a melodic line, which is a line that appears like a staircase effect. That instead of the eye moving like this, the eye moves. And if you look at portrait artists, for example, John Singer Sargent knew this, but it's not revealed in writing. So, for example, he would put on this, people can relate to this because he would put on a blazer of a subject on a portrait, for instance. This is how normally you would have a blazer, but he would purposely do this to the folds. And that what happens there, and now I know why, because of the reverse engineering, you go like this and the eye is taking a ride instead of going like this.
Falling off the page.
Or very quickly. Yeah, that's the most important concept. So I've identified 4 lines that are either too fast or too monotonous, and it's going to make a lot of sense. Anything that's an implied straight line that appears many times in nature. Anything that's a semicircle appears many times in nature. Zigzag lines are too monotonous. Those are like the boughs of evergreen trees or a forest of evergreen trees. And the 4th one would be a wavy line, which is a lot of trees put together. It's too monotonous. So I take those 4 lines and I substitute them for 3 lines. And then I equate those like your strings on a guitar. So I call them graceful lines, melodic lines, and interrupted lines if you need a straight line, but you interrupt it. So I came to a point where anything after 2 inches, if you're moving the eye too quickly, it's going to bother the viewer. That solves everything. Another thing is that many artists, I don't know if you've ever taken classes or how much you know about it, but many artists talk about abstract shapes. I'm sure you've heard that term, but they never identify it. They tell the students, "Oh, I'm painting abstract shapes." Oh yeah. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Nothing. So I came up with something that's never written about, and it just makes so much sense. And that is, whatever shape you're painting, whether it's a tree, a bush, rocks, anything, all you have to do is take an imaginary line, split it down the middle, compare one half of that shape against the other half of that shape. If both sides or both halves are completely different, you got yourself an abstract shape.
Oh.
Just like that. So that immediately improves your rocks to your tree. So if you're looking at a tree, for example, we're talking about implication here. If they're similar, because a little variation is not going to do it. Okay, here's the big secret of the whole thing.
I can see
it takes me 15 minutes, or let's say 1 hour, could change everybody's life when it comes to all painting, not just landscape. Honestly, it's like the holy grail of it. This is the answer. Most of the time, trees in nature are somewhat round. They don't present themselves like this. And that's because they have to follow the dome of the light. The light has to travel around, so all the leaves are lining up. So 85% of the trees are going to be symmetrical. So you have to reject, in nature, you have to reject almost everything that's symmetrical. Nature is not a very good model for shapes. Okay, so the answer is, first of all, you take an imaginary line down the middle, and you compare side A, this is mirrored, so side B, and compare both halves. If this half is obviously different than that half, you're going to automatically have a good abstract shape. Now, what's going to make that shape is the famous line that I told you about, which is you follow this roller coaster line here, and you need these very pronounced the entrances here, especially this one. That line is what makes the tree is not good looking, the shape is not good looking, it's all in the line. Wow. If you can create that roller coaster line on the contour of clouds and trees. More examples of that would be, okay, this is a painting that I just did in class. Mm-hmm. This was last Saturday.
Beautiful.
Okay, let's reverse engineer it, so to say. Yep. Okay, so that as far as the graceful line is concerned. If you follow my line here, I'll sort of illustrate on a piece of paper. This is what I identified as a melodic line. See the staircase effect?
Mm-hmm.
At the bottom. So I'm not, when I'm doing it, the cliffs in the original photograph are more straight. But I already know that any line that's over 2 inches, straight line, is going to bother. It's going to reduce the beauty of the painting. So 2 inches is about as far as you can go on a 12 by 16. So I got that and I got this. That's fine. But here, that would have ruined my painting. What makes it so appealing is that you have, the eye is, everything that you, pretend the brain is a scanner. Okay? So the scanner is picking up the pixels. So the brain, since we were born, we're used to seeing lines and we read. So we have trained our brains to read, following lines, one after another, and reading words. It's ingrained in our subconscious mind big time. So what we normally do is, instead of looking at a painting, we are scanning it with the brain and we are reading it. But while we're reading it, it's got to be a pleasant eye flow. So when I created this concept, I mean, the concept exists. Many top artists know this, but they don't put a word to it. They just do it because it looks good. They take their brush and they create this staircase effect because I like the way it looks. But when you have a group of 50 students, you're not identifying that. Just like you're not identifying an abstract shape. What you need to do is identify and explain that, the brain enjoys reading information slowly that somehow even resembles words. So what the viewers enjoy is to go in here, mentally speaking, follow this line, go in here, come out. All that is what makes the painting work. That's called a melodic line. That right there is this is the most important concept in landscape painting that's never talked about. Now there's much more. Like I can take it's not talked about. It's starting to get into the mainstream because I've given YouTube demos, and I know as a fact that some top professional artists have taken my classes, and they're starting to use that language now.
Good.
I've been hearing it hitting the mainstream. But as you can see, I've identified all this almost in an artistic, scientific way.
Yeah, you basically dissected the
there are about 5 of them.
Okay.
And I got 2. Right now I revealed the abstract shape to identify it, the graceful line, and the melodic line. The third one would be gradient planes. It's never spoken about. That concept not even referred to in any book. I hope it divulges, but you're getting some information here that it could actually. I'm seeing that you're nodding. That can actually change your way of painting. Now remember I don't know, maybe you don't do landscapes, maybe you do other things, but even top portrait artists know this. For example, if you look at Andrew Loomis's drawings, do you know Andrew Loomis?
Yes. Okay,
well, there you go. If you look, you always ask yourself, why does he draw the hair of the children there's no roundness? Why do all these artists avoid the roundness, the egg roundness of the head? The reason for that is because the eye travels like this. That's moving the eye too quickly. So what they purposely do is they add props, like they put hats, they change the hairdo, they make a woman's straight hair. Like in your case, instead of having it round, I would probably break up your hair and go like this and make it even a little bit messy and have some loose hair strands. And the reason for that is, again, I need to create that graceful line on top of your head. I need to create the graceful line on your hair. So I would emphasize that instead of your hair going straight, I would go like this and put that motion in there. Because I know the line and all the top, Sargent, Sorolla, Zorn, they all did that. But never has it been put like a finger on it and say, why does John Singer Sargent change the in fact, if you look at the kind of suits that he used to, paint very famous people. So they would put, the blazer, that's the suit, the blazer, right?
Yep.
So why I showed you earlier, why would he, it looks like he puts on a blazer that's a bigger size, that you should go back to the tailor and have him fix it because the blazer's too big on you. It looks like pajamas. Well, I told you why. That's because you want that melodic line. And so it's wow, the whole light bulb came on. The next concept that's extremely important, that puts the difference between, you know, amateur artists and professional artists, is something that's called a gradient plane. And what that means is this. It's not written about, but they do it. If you look at this cliff over here, you'll notice that we have blue here, and then it turns to orange. Now, this does not exist in nature. Gradient planes very rarely exist in nature. That's why I'm very much against this concept about paint what you see, because you don't see that. But if I go from blue to orange, I'm entertaining you as a viewer. So first of all, if you look at my cliff overall, everything is divided into abstract shapes. Remember we said an abstract shape is take an imaginary line down the middle, compare both sides. Whatever you do on one side should be different than the other side.
Yes.
Just to review that. For example, this evergreen tree here, you never see something like that in nature. They're both they're the same on both sides. But because I know that, I take this imaginary line down the middle. I compare that side with this side. You can see they're completely different. Instant entertainment. And then also I consider this rocky melodic movement. So for me, it's not about painting an evergreen tree, because evergreen trees normally are like this. Zigzag lines.
Yeah.
But in my case, they're not like that. I'm thinking more about moving the eye in a very pleasant way, and I just use that symbol to justify it.
And you never break. It is, and I noticed that you never break anything in halves. It looks like you're very much using thirds and fifths.
Yeah, well, that's the 2/3, 1/3 rule. Yeah. So here, every subdivision is an abstract shape in itself. Analyze this one, take an imaginary line down the middle, this one, down the middle, that one, down the middle, this, especially this rock right over here. So when I'm producing this, I look at the photograph, but I don't copy the photograph. I just use it as an idea. And I say to myself, okay, there's a rock in front of the cliff. I'll put that in there, but I'm going to design my own. So if you take this and you take a line down the middle, as I'm developing it, my left brain, I'm sure you've ever read the book by Betty Edwards, Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain. Anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so you're very well, I see that you're very much into it. But anyway, she made that point that when you're working from the left brain, that's the scientific reasonable brain, right? And so what you do is you produce symmetrical shapes. So we're all fighting against that. So when I'm doing this, one way out of that is just that one concept that an abstract shape is different on two sides. As I'm painting this, if I leave it like that, it's too similar. So I'm thinking, okay, two different sides. So constantly I'm checking two different sides. So I add more weight here, and I have myself a beautiful rock, a symbol of a rock. So that's the answer. Everything is divided into, then you can abstract shapes, and then you can also see there's a gradient plane here. You can see there's one color up here and another one down here. Even on the grass, you got a gradient plane here. Then we have a gradient plane here, where to avoid another advantage of, first of all, gradient planes are very entertaining. Viewers love that. You go from blue to orange on a rock, for example. On a white wall in a building, on the shadow side, you go from blue to orange. But also the other advantage of a gradient plane is you're creating a sense of depth. Now, if I go lighter here, if I go lighter here and darker here, it creates the illusion of depth on everything, lighter to darker. So now you're sensing that there are 20 meters, let's say from here to the end. If I make everything one value, you won't perceive that.
Yep.
So that's called a gradient plane. Huge concept. Number 3, never spoken about. Another one is principle of contrast, but it's a little bit difficult to explain, but I'll make an attempt.
Thank you.
Which means, yeah, I can do with this painting. As I was telling my students, this is what makes something so entertaining. People have this idea that they have to be true to nature as much as possible, and that's a big error. Because in the real world, this cliff is probably about the size of a 4-story building.
Mm-hmm.
This evergreen tree here is probably about an apartment building high. So I'm bringing all this down to, like, let's say a 12 by 16 canvas. That's 2-dimensional. So how are you going to bring a 3-dimensional world that's macro, about the size of an IMAX theater, to a simple small format and convince the viewers that that's realistic? There's nothing realistic in the painting. That's the error. What you need to do is reinterpret and apply principles that will create the same impact as the real place without worrying about documenting the real place, which means you need to modify the lines. You need to apply techniques because this is artificial. So that the viewers see this on the wall and say, wow, I keep looking at it. I feel like I'm looking through a window at the real place. They're not. What they're enjoying is the lines and the shapes. Now, another very important concept is called the principle of contrast. You see how I did a lot of subdivisions here? Okay, if I keep doing that, it gets tiring.
Exactly.
So what do? I do the subdivisions and then suddenly one big solid shape. So one big solid shape versus subdivisions. When the viewers contrast that back and forth, you have created beauty. Now, nature will give you many rocks. Let's say you can find 100 rocks in one pile. What I do is take many of those and put them together to make one great big rock, and then a smaller one, and a smaller one, and a smaller one. That's called the principle of contrasts. So I equate this to Goldilocks, Mama, Papa, Kitty Bears. And right there, you have instant success in a painting. I've done between 430 and 450 paintings live with my students, and not one of them has collapsed. Of course, there are some that I like more than others, but not one of them has been like, oh, I have to burn it. And why? Because of all these principles. So in my reverse engineering, I realized that there are about 215 principles to waterfalls, skies, seascapes, everything. And your paintings are going to be only as good as those principles that you know. So it is paint what you know, not paint what you see. And I would love to debate anybody because they have this cliche where you go to workshops and they say, paint what you see. And nothing is further from the truth than that. You can't even copy the colors in nature from that.
You need to understand so you can interpret.
Right. So those are just some of the concepts. Obviously, I would have to tie you down to your chair.
Oh, you wouldn't.
For several weeks to give you all of it. It's all these lines are there. They're all the little secrets are embedded. And just to look at the lines, you got
beautiful work.
Graceful line here on the waterfall. The original was just a flat rectangular waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you take an imaginary line down the middle and you compare that side of the waterfall with that one, they're different. So it makes it very easy for me to ignore the photograph and design my own shape as long as I have a different line here and a different line here. And then the rule of thirds, that you know for sure, the rule of thirds. So I put a rock and the 1/3 ratio. Then here is the melodic line. Follow my pen. The original had pretty much a straight line with the grass.
Mm-hmm.
So make it bumpy.
Yeah. And I love that you're calling it the melodic line. It's just like when you're listening to a concert and They slow
Right.
down the pace and the rhythm so you really get into the feeling of the music. You're doing the exact same thing with a painting,
It's,
just
in fact, you can
visually.
equate music a lot to this.
Mm-hmm.
It started,
Thus the name.
yes, correct. So that's one big, huge thing. Now, if you look at the rocks, we talk about gradient planes. You got, or color variations. You got some blue rocks rocks are usually just gray. They're boring. But you'll never see purple on a rock.
Yeah,
But I added it.
much richer.
So, I mean, a lot of things are taught, like ordinary compositional things like a visual path, right? Focal point at the 1/3. I mean, those are typical things that anybody who's a devoted student will know it. But the secrets, the real, like, okay, now I understand exactly what's going on here. Those 5 or so concepts can revolutionize your paintings. Right there and then.
Thank you for sharing this.
Gradient plane here means rocks. Principle of contrast here is, obviously the original scene, you see these rocks underwater and applying them. The original scene would have them all the way up there, but it would be boring. So I'm telling you the same story. Well, what happens if I put the rocks here and then I change it to the blue? I have principle of contrasts, or I have a gradient plane. Also, you have principle of contrast here, or what we call color variation. Mm-hmm. Look at the grass. You got green and then ochre.
Especially because our brains are so good at filling in gaps. You don't need to spell it out for us.
That is a huge concept, Anya. I call that actually there's a terminology to that called pareidolia.
Okay.
If you look it up, it's difficult to spell, but you just have to provide that. I'm glad you touched on that, because it's a huge concept. Because in landscape painting, for example, these are not evergreen trees. Like they're just small miniature things, but your brain is going to fill in the missing information. I don't have to put all those zigzag boughs. I just have to create a symbol, and you will add and you will justify its presence in the painting. That's very important. That concept has to be taught also. I guess it's not really mentioned that way, but I make a reference to that quite a bit. And my students say, well, I don't see that detail. There are more rocks. You don't need that. Your brain feels I call it the mind's eye. So I say to them, if you can dream in shapes and color, then your mind can add to the picture. So the solution is that you're talking about landscapes only for now, is if you make something poetic, your mind's eye will start to daydream. As a matter of fact, simplification is very important, because what you should do is just provide the necessary information. And then what's going to happen is that your mind's eye, it's even better when you say the mind's eye, the daydreaming mind, or the mind that when you're dreaming, it participates unconsciously. We are adding information to things. So your painting should only be like something that stimulates imagination. Give a certain amount, you feed the viewer a certain amount of information, and the viewer fills in all the rest. So for example, all this over here, there's no clarity to what it really is. But in your mind, you're adding what it's missing. And that's what makes the painting more entertaining, because now the viewers are contributing to the scene. So when they say things like, when a student says to me, your painting looks so real, I say, I think that's an insult. But if they say, I can sit on that rock and put my feet in the water, that's a compliment, because now they're going into the scene. It's called representational landscape painting. It's like a fuse between hyperrealism and impressionism, which, by the way, is the most common art movement. If you go to the top galleries, at least in the US, that's what they handle. You're creating symbols that are entertaining, but then this does look to you somewhat realistic. It's convincing you that it's a realistic scene, especially if I do this on like 48 by 60 inches. You feel like you can walk right into it. But that's because your mind is doing it. So you're not really seeing it. your mind is participating in it.
Okay, Johan, so about teaching, you were talking about how you started teaching in 2011 through,
I gave free courses.
Exactly. But you were telling me while we were off the record a while ago that you were teaching online way before that. So can you tell us a little bit about that? When did online teaching start?
I always thought there was potential in it. And obviously, right? There's to know. And there was no technology where you could have, the MP4s did not exist. What you had was JPEGs. That's it. It was still photos. So there's a company that came up with a device that would take a snapshot of my painting and then keep uploading JPEGs in a sequence. But then my brush would move like.
Oh my God.
Very early in the pioneer years.
Huh.
And I advertised, and I still got like 6 people to experiment with, and I so much believed in it. And of course, now things have really revolutionized. But I was the pioneer, at least as fine as fine art, because you could Google then. Fine art education, I was the only one that was doing it online. That's a fact.
What year was this? Do you remember?
That's probably the early 2000s or late 1990s, that far back.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was a
something
child.
Like that. Yep.
I was but a young child.
Yeah, I remember the MP4 technology started to come out too, and that's what made the big difference. So anyway, I was teaching these concepts to people for free. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to get it out. And, again, Artist Network took notice of that. And we spoke, we made a contract. And I'm still working for them on
Wonderful.
giving their, and I'm very proud of that because, again, like I said, I used to subscribe to these magazines. And I always said, oh, I wish I could paint like that. Look at that beautiful painting with the mountains in the background. And it was like, was like you were sighing about it. And I didn't have the information. Can't get it. My biggest problem was the transition from the photograph to the painting, that in between which all the problems are. And I could copy paintings, but I couldn't do my own correctly. If you saw my first tree, Anya, it'd be incredibly ridiculous about how, and I really didn't have, like some of these top artists, they're just talented. They don't need all the training. They're like the 6-year-old Mozart playing the piano. They can just start to do things, but the head knowledge, and that's why I don't think they're very good teachers, to be honest. I'm going to criticize them without giving names, but because it came so easy to them. Because if you think about it, if there are 300 million artists, people that live in the States, let's say that, I don't know, maybe 1 million artists or so, 30 of them that would be extremely talented would not be unusual that they can do things just naturally.
Yeah, they don't know how to
without
explain
knowing
it.
Why or how. They just do it.
Yeah.
But I did both. I had to build up my head knowledge for the lack of talent.
And that's what makes you such a great teacher, and your students are so lucky to have you.
Because I have all this information already digested. That's where I convey it. That's where I teach it correctly.
So, talking about teaching, I listened to you say in an interview that once you can master oils and watercolors, everything falls off the brush pretty easily. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yes, that is coming to these principles. When you know what I just told you, remember that part where I talked about the rock and I had to struggle with it. And immediately when I say, okay, this side has to be different, this side has to be different than that side, it comes naturally. It's all enjoyable. There's no frustration. It's just easy. And that's where I say it falls off the brush.
I see.
Because now you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing. If I do a lot of subdivisions, I know that the next rock next to it has to be a larger one.
And why oils and watercolor?
Pardon me?
Why oils and watercolor? So why those two in specific? If you learn how to do that in acrylics, would that be the same? Or is there anything particular?
Maybe that needs to be worded correctly. If it's worded like that, that should be corrected. Because it has nothing to do with the medium. It has everything to do. In that case, we have to throw in pastels. I have to look at that paragraph. There could be something missing there. But I would say if I would like to edit that, I would say once you have internalized the major principles of design, then everything will fall off the brush without an effort. Then it's just a matter of mixing paint. The effort is, oh, I got paint on my hands, I got paint on my clothes, but your effort's not in the painting.
So it's just the easy, maybe fun part is, okay, gouache or acrylic or watercolor, they behave differently, the properties are different, but you just need to understand.
Yeah, once these principles are understood, any medium will work.
Okay, so
I'm going to look for that paragraph and update it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because it's just a matter of, do you understand how the medium works? Just apply the same principles. Because sure, watercolor is transparent. Acrylic is not as transparent as watercolor. Oil is very different, and the way that it layers and dries is completely different. But if you get the properties right, the principles are the same no matter what, right?
Well, let's put it this way: if you know why you're doing something in a certain section, then watercolor should not be a big problem. It's the second guessing where you get the problems. Like this whole thing's embedded with secrets, right? That's like a Mexican town, and so it becomes very easy once you have these principles. For example, here's a principle of contrasts. See the tiles here? There are none here. Two reasons. One is it's more entertaining. In other words, it's not repetitive and boring because you're doing the same. Any information that you keep repeating becomes boring. It's like telling a joke many times. So this is quiet versus busy. Principle of contrasts. Then you got, why are these sticking out? To slow down the eye. Because again, we got more than 2 or 3 inches here. Then we got a gradient plane, darker to lighter. Blue to warm. Color transition, orange to pink. You're never going to see a bugambilia. I'm sure you have those in Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
You're never going to see una bugambilia, or I don't know how you say in Portuguese, but in Spanish it's bugambilia. You're never going to have one that goes from orange to pink in real life. But I create that because that transition is like eating a beefsteak and mashed potatoes. Or turkey and cranberry. So all these things is what makes the difference. So it makes it count. You got, for example, lighter, darker. For example, here's another example of principle of contrast. It gets a little bit busy here with the cobblestones. I'm sure you have those in Portugal.
Plenty.
The cobblestone roads, or las piedritas, no? The little stones. Mm-hmm. You get many of them. It becomes boring. The point is that the viewer's brain has to process all the pixels. So if I keep adding more and more, your brain is too busy processing the visual information. It doesn't give you time to dream. So I have to hand you something simple, and this is still a little bit busy, but something simple so that your imagination can play and not occupy the brain to do the scanning. So I don't have to put all the cobblestone roads on here. I just have to put a few here, and then nothing here. A few here, and then nothing here. You're going to fill in the rest. But why is it important to fill in the rest that you so eloquently said, Anya? Because by leaving things out, you're giving the mind the entertainment of putting in what your brush did not put in. So the viewer becomes a fellow artist. That's why it's important what you just said. And then I know I have to play with edges. For example, if I have a hard edge here, very defined edge here, if I contrast that to a soft edge, that creates depth. Because here's an important thing too. This is probably number 5. There is no such thing as a soft edge in nature, except if it's a cloud, except if it's moving, which are clouds and waterfalls and seascapes. But anything that's static, that's stationary, there is no such thing as a soft edge. So why do soft edges look so good in watercolor? Because you're creating depth. So the only way I can trick you to believing that these trees are like 150 or 200 meters in the distance is that I have to soften the edges. So it's an artificial technique to make it look like it's going back into the distance. So if you tell that to the students who are watercolors and you say, every watercolor painting, in my view, should have soft edges, whether it's a portrait, still life, I don't care. It should be there somewhere, or one way or another, it should be there. That's the medium. When the artist understands how important they are, they will not forget to put them in.
Because our brain does not understand if something is big or far away unless something is close or small in comparison, because we work with comparison.
Correct. Or the edges. Obviously, this building is bigger than that one, but that's just the primitive way to establish recession. There are many other ways, but one of them is through edges. So now people say, well, I can't leave those. I can't, because in a photograph, you will be tempted to make this edge probably about the same as that one because it's in the photo. But then the photo is not 3D. You have to trick the viewer into believing in 3D.
Which is why people love the portrait option when you're taking photos with your phone, because it just blurs the edges, creates the illusion of depth, and just makes it so much more appealing.
Have you seen artificial intelligent portraits?
Oh, yeah.
The background's out of focus?
Yeah.
I think that the computers tapped into my classes for some reason, because how can they come up with such big... I'm just joking. But wow.
You know, portrait mode, and it makes you look thinner, slimmer too.
Yeah. So when I execute this watercolor live that I did with my students online live, this was done all these are done in class. The chances of errors are reducing so much.
So the change in medium is just get to understand the medium, understand how it mixes, how it travels on paper, how you deal with its opaqueness or transparency.
Yeah.
And that's just the execution part of it. But if you know these...
But then again, especially with watercolor, your chances of error is going to reduce. Even in your children's drawings, if you're going to put rocks or something in there, now you know you have two different sides to an object, and it takes all the guessing out, because you know what normally people do? They do a drawing of a rock, right? And they say things like, oh, that doesn't look like. Then you erase it. And you go back again. I don't know if you find yourself.
Until you get it right.
And then you erase it. And that finally looks good. But it looks good because you finally got it after 5 tries.
And you don't know why still.
Right from the beginning, just say 2 different sides, and that's the end of my problem.
If you understand what makes it look good, it saves you so much time and effort and frustration. Oh, the frustration. Right. How big do you usually paint?
12 by 16. It fits the camera because a lot of people are watching a monitor that's 27 inches. So if you go small, let's say 9 by 12 to 12 by 16, then you start to see the canvas, and anything weakens when you go from small to big. So I prefer just to go to about the same size as the person's monitor, which is 27 inches.
And what about when you're painting for yourself and not teaching online?
Oh my gosh, for me, the biggest the possible. My favorite size is 48 by 60 inches. Wow. To fill up a whole wall. Yeah, I want people, if it's a mountain scene, for example, the one I just showed you earlier, this one here, I would love that to fill up almost a complete wall.
And how different is it in terms of execution when you're painting massively big instead of,
there's a principle to that, where I got principles to everything. The rule of thumb is, the smaller the painting, the more poetic and the less information you should put in, because it becomes busy. The larger the painting, now you need to start adding stuff. If it's a 48 by 16, then you have to start to add a lot of visual information. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, if it's something so small that's simplified, and you take that and you go big, it looks incomplete. But then if I take this and I reduce it by an 8 by 12, it starts to look, it looks a little bit cluttered. But I have a solution for that.
Is this why you need to go to a museum to fully understand the dynamics of a piece? Because I'm just imagining, take a photo of a massively big painting that, fits on a wall, and you put it on a book so you can understand that there's a painting. But the experience is different. Because
definitely.
Since it was made for a big canvas, right? Then when you make it a print size,
when you shrink it, it becomes cluttered. It becomes big. A good example of that would be Albert Bernstein. His work. I don't know if you've heard of him. Famous landscape art. Not Bernstein. Bernstein. I'm not pronouncing his name correctly.
Okay.
Anyway, he was famous, and so he had these very big paintings. And if you bring them down to about the size of a book, they look cluttered. So my answer is, the bigger the painting, start adding. Add more blades of grass. Add more rocks. fact, this is already a little bit busy on a 12 by 16.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell because if I go bigger, it doesn't look as busy anymore if I go this size.
There you go, folks. This is why you need to go to museums.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've been to the Metropolitan Museum 3 times, and I haven't been to Europe though, so I don't know. But landscape artists have gotten much better over the years. There has been more sharing of because of the photography and video and things. People can not copy techniques, well, not copy paintings, but they can steal in a benign way information from each other. So let's say an artist takes my class and says, oh, you put purple on that rock. That takes away the grayness. Then that person's going to add it. And that person takes information from another artist and another artist and another artist and compiles it, which is what I did. And I'm all this is compilation of ideas of many other artists put together. Then you're going to have a better landscape. In those years, we had the limitations where we didn't have photography. You know, how often would you meet a landscape artist? You're probably maybe the only one in the region. How are you going to learn from someone else if there's no contact? You'd have to go by horse. That makes sense. Well, definitely landscape artists and landscape painting have gotten much better and more towards our modern times than they were before. I'm not that impressed with many landscapes that I saw in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm much more impressed with what I see nowadays in galleries and Googling.
Out of all the years, everything that you've experienced over the years, teaching, making art for yourself, for others, what is your most or one of the most cherished memories that you have? What comes to mind when I ask you this?
When my students get awards, well, they share it and they win awards. They start to teach themselves. A lot of things that people said, I was depressed. This is healing. People that go through depression, they lose a loved one. They're living under a dark cloud. They take up painting and they feel another reason for living. So I feel that not only am I contributing for people to improve their art, but psychologically there's medicine because I motivate artists. First of all, it makes it very affordable. And secondly, they feel very motivated that they can take the classes and they can produce art. And they say, I used to cry every day. Now I'm laughing.
My God, how does that make you feel?
Brings tears to my eyes.
Thank you for sharing this. This is beautiful. Thank you for sharing everything you do with the art community. It means a lot to us.
What did you think? What was your favorite part of this episode? Let us know in the comments section of the post associated with the episode at edyourlab.com/JV. Again, those are the letters J and V. And a final reminder to join us on September 7th, noon Eastern, for a free class with Johannes. We will paint a shoreline scene in acrylics. It's from beginners to more advanced artists. Everyone is invited to join. You should definitely join if you're listening to this interview. And again, all links at edyourlab.com/JV. I hope to see you there. And until then, make more art.